Public hearing. We do have a public hearing this evening. We're going to hold a public hearing, waive the first reading, and introduce an ordinance approving a development agreement with Castle Companies for construction of 10 new homes in the Crestmoor neighborhood.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. On tonight's agenda is the introduction of an ordinance approving a development agreement with Castle Companies to build 10 replacement homes in the Crestmoor neighborhood. We have three main topics for my presentation tonight. The first topic is, what's a development agreement and why is the City Council looking at it now? Second topic is, what are the key provisions of the development agreement? And the third topic is, what are the next steps? Now, it's important to note, as I mentioned at the Planning Commission meeting last week, that we are not here tonight to discuss or review the actual homes, their design, or their plans. There will be actually three separate opportunities for the public to provide input on that. One of them is a community meeting on the 21st of this month. There will then be architectural review and a Planning Commission meeting, with the Planning Commission making the final decision on the design. David, after I'm finished with my presentation, will touch on those meetings when I'm done. So I see that we do have some of the residents who were at the Planning Commission meeting last week when this was considered. Many of those residents, there were about 25 of them, at the Planning Commission meeting provided input, asked questions that staff answered, hopefully completely and thoroughly. And then after having a public hearing, the Planning Commission did review the development agreement and ordinance and recommended approval. So let's take a second and back up and talk about what a development agreement is and what the purpose of it is. And generally, a development agreement is just a contract that's adopted by ordinance between the city and a developer. And the purpose of it is for the mutual benefit of both parties, both the city and the developer. The benefit to the city, several benefits to the city. One of them is that the developer will commit to building all of the homes on an agreed schedule. Second benefit is that they'll agree to certain development standards and processes that the city will put in place. The benefit to the developer is that the city can't change the rules in the middle of the game, so to speak. Once it started, the city can't say, well, we've changed our minds. We want to reduce the allowable size of this house from 2,000 square feet to 1,500. So the city knows what it's getting and the developer knows what they're getting. As you may recall, the city did an extensive RFP process, request for proposals, to solicit proposals from a number of qualified developers to rebuild all of these 12 homes. And the city received many good proposals, but ended up selecting Castle at a public meeting as the company that was best able to fulfill all of the city's goals of completing those homes. And as you also may recall, Castle's offer of the price to pay for those lots wasn't the highest, it wasn't the lowest, it was somewhere in the middle. So after the city did that, the city and Castle, and then separately Castle and PG&E entered into a purchase and sale agreement. And they opened an escrow by which Castle would buy the 7 lots from PG&E and the 3 lots from the city. Castle has made a deposit into escrow, and escrow is scheduled to close actually in just a few months, April of this year, April 14th. One of the conditions of closing that escrow is that the city approve and adopt an ordinance and approve a development agreement by the end of January. So that's why this item is coming to you this evening, is because there's that requirement in the purchase and sale agreement. Let's take just a second and look at what are the key provisions of the development agreement. And first of all, and importantly, the developer has committed to completing all of the homes within 6 to 9 months of issuing a building permit. And what that means is that most of them will be done by the end of the year, some sooner. As far as fees are concerned, the developers agreed to pay all of the city fees. There's no discounts or breaks, no changes to what's authorized by the city ordinances. And then thirdly, the house size and style are required to be all in accordance with the city's existing ordinances. So the developer can't come in and say they want an exception, they want a variance, they want a use permit to build a bigger house. They're agreeing to build those houses at that size which are under the current ordinance unlike, for example, some of the other residents of the neighborhood who were able to build houses that were larger than the FAR. The purpose of that requirement in the development agreement is for those new 10 lots sort of infill in different places to blend into the existing surroundings. Now, since the Planning Commission meeting last week, we've made 2 minor revisions, which the developer has agreed to, that you have in front of you, to the development agreement. The first one is we sort of changed the description of the project throughout, just to make it clear that it applies individually to each of the 10 homes, because they're going to be built on slightly different schedules. And previously, the developer had asked that once each home is sold, we terminate the development agreement with respect to that particular home, and we said that's fine. So we wanted to make sure that the converse applied, which is at the beginning it also applies to each of those homes individually. The second change we made was a slightly longer construction period, just by 60 days, for 3 of those homes. And the reason for that is because there was some geotechnical evaluation. It was discovered that those homes that were there before are actually on 50 or 60 or more feet of fill, which is a somewhat more difficult situation than exists for the other 6 homes. So we wanted to make sure, and the developer wanted to make sure they had enough time to fully evaluate that and complete those homes. All right, so we've talked about what development agreements are, what this one says, what are the next steps. So after David makes a few brief comments, we're going to take some questions from all of you, if you have any. You'll open the public hearing, respond, we can respond to any questions, close the public hearing, and then hopefully introduce the ordinance approving the development agreement. It is scheduled for adoption at the next City Council meeting in 2 weeks, and that'll be on your consent calendar, barring any issues that come up. In the meantime, Castle has already submitted plans to the building department, and the staff is already checking those plans. David can fill in the details of what happens next then with the upcoming community meeting, architectural review, and the Planning Commission. So that concludes my portion of the report. Take it away, David.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Mr. Mayor and City Council members, next steps would be that we're going forward at the January 21st meeting that the City Attorney mentioned. It's a neighborhood meeting. It's an opportunity really for the Castle Company to introduce themselves to the neighbors and to present the preliminary plans, the submitted plans for this project, and to receive initial input. So at this point, in accordance with the schedule that you have in the development agreement, Castle Companies has submitted their plans for the project. Those plans are in review at this time, and we'll have the neighborhood meeting, which is the Castle Companies meeting, an opportunity to introduce themselves at that meeting. After that, we'll have an Architectural Review Committee meeting. That's a city meeting and a standard process. The entitlement that's being requested is an architectural review permit. That Architectural Review Committee meeting will be held at City Hall. That meeting is scheduled for February 12th. After that meeting, the Architectural Review Committee will be presenting a recommendation to our Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission meeting is tentatively scheduled for March 17th. In accordance with the overall schedule, we'd be expecting that the developer, Castle Companies, would be submitting construction documents for plan review within 10 days of the Planning Commission hearing. Then there would be a review process of those construction documents, and we would expect that a building permit could be issued for the individual lots. Again, this is a subdivision that's been in place since 1958. And the objective here is to provide replacement home construction of these homes that were destroyed during the explosion and fire in 2010. So the intent is to issue permits for these homes in May of this year, and as our city attorney indicated, the overall time frame for completion would be that within 6 to 9 months of issuance of the building permit, all of the 10 individual homes would be constructed. The developer has agreed, and the city will be requiring that the pre-disaster development standards and our city's residential design guidelines will be adhered to, no exceptions, no use permits, no variances, no exceptions. So the plans that have come in are being reviewed now, not only for their architectural style, colors, materials, and treatments, but to also make sure that these plans adhere to the development standards, pre-disaster development standards, and our residential design guidelines. So that's a quick overview, a brief overview of our next steps. We would expect that if the development agreement goes forward and the project moves forward, that the homes would be completed sometime toward the end of this year and be ready for occupancy. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Good. Any questions of staff before we open the public hearing? Ken?
Through the Chair, David, not having a chance to see the Planning Commission meeting, but could you give an idea, saying that there were, did you say there were about 25 residents there?
Yes.
Can you give an idea of what the questions were or possible concerns that were given at the meeting?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think one of the concerns that we heard was that this project move forward in a timely manner, that indeed the schedule that's laid out in the development agreement is adhered to. So I think that was a clear comment that came forward. Another comment that came forward was a concern about when would construction occur, when typically would construction occur. And I think a desire to see the construction activity occur during the week, weekdays, Monday through Fridays, and not on the weekends and not during holidays. So I think that's something else we heard as well. I think those were the two comments: adhering to the schedule, trying to minimize disruption to the neighborhood during the construction period. And I think the tone is, as I understood it, as I observed it, was, I think, quite positive, but really wanting to make sure, let's get this done, let's get it done hopefully by the end of the year and minimize disruption.
Okay. Any other questions of staff?
Through the chair to
Go ahead.
Rico, go ahead.
go on what Councilman Ibarra said. So what was there any response or suggestions as far as the weekday work versus non-weekend, as far as the time frame and how we can foresee and the developer can see themselves keeping on the time frame so everybody has peace of mind?
Councilmember, that would be, we would expect a condition of approval in the architectural review resolution. So as we go forward to the Planning Commission and discuss the actual implementation of constructing these replacement homes, we would talk at that time about schedule. As I indicated to one of the residents that was here, it would be very standard and typical for us to put a condition of approval that clarifies for all parties, staff, the developer, and the residents, what those hours would be. At this point in time, based on the feedback we heard, the intent would be to work with the developer to have the construction activity during weekdays, not weekends and holidays.
Okay. Michael?
I should also point out, Mr. Mayor and council members, that Steve Garrett is here as a representative of the Castle Companies, and additionally, he could respond to any questions that you may have.
Okay. Michael?
Thank you. Mark, I had a few questions on your part, mostly around the implications of the language. So when we use the word replacement home versus project, I saw that was consistently changed. So what is the real implication of calling these replacement homes versus new constructions?
I think there were a couple of considerations. The first one was, as I mentioned before, that backing up, these are replacement homes. These are not. This isn't a new subdivision, and we wanted to make sure that it was clear in the development agreement that this is simply a concerted effort to replace homes that were there before the explosion. So that was really one of the main motivating factors. Second of all, as I mentioned, the developer had requested a condition in the development agreement, which was in previously, and is still in there now, which says that as each home is sold, we can terminate the development agreement with respect to that home, in effect treating each home as a separate entity. And we wanted to make sure that it was clear throughout the development agreement that we didn't hung up on the language whereby the development agreement applies to some unified project and then for some reason that creates a problem in terminating with respect to each home individually. So those were two of the factors that led us to want to make that change throughout. It's also consistent with the environmental document that's being filed, or documents that are being filed. That was actually one of the questions at the Planning Commission meeting, what kind of environmental review, and the answer is these homes are categorically exempt, just as all single-family homes are and were in the neighborhood. And so we wanted to make sure that this wasn't treated as some sort of unified development for purposes of CEQA. So there were a number of issues that prompted us to want to make that change.
So if all the building permits are issued in May and they're all going to be constructed in 6 months, why would they want to stagger the, I mean, it essentially becomes a project. They're all starting at the same time, they're all ending at the same time. I'm not understanding why there's a motivation to not treat it as a project.
One of the reasons was that 4 of the homes have difficult conditions on their lots, and so the developer wanted additional time to make sure that those homes could be treated separately if there were geotechnical issues that came up. So in effect, what the developer is going to be doing is building the 6 homes that are relatively unconstrained, and then there are some constraints which there's still some uncertainty about on 4 of the lots. We wanted to make sure that we could treat each one of them separately.
And so what disadvantage would the builder have in keeping the contract, or basically keeping this alive for the properties that were completed? I mean, it's a very short span of time. I'm not understanding why that's an important
Right, and I may not be fully understanding your question. What happens is when the escrow closes, the title company wants to be able to pass clear title to the buyer without being encumbered by the obligations of the development agreement. And so that's why at every close of escrow, it's anticipated that the city would send something to the title company saying, development agreement is terminated with respect to this home.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Anything else? All right, at this time, we'll open the public hearing. Would anyone from the public like to address the council on this matter? If we close the public hearing, okay.
Terry Peterson, Scenic Court, Mr. Mayor and City Council. This is an amazing project. It shows the council and staff working together with a developer to do these replacement homes in an almost unbelievably quick schedule. That's going to benefit the neighborhood. It's going to put new homes in place that will raise the property values of the remaining homes that are already there. And nothing can erase the explosion, but this will tend to reunify the neighborhood. I've seen a lot of projects. I've been involved in construction, reconstruction, new construction my whole life, and it's unusual to see a city respond so significantly, so quickly, and in such a unified way. I think in a way the small attendance at this meeting is due to a couple factors. One, there were a lot of neighbors at the Planning Commission meeting, and they did have a lot of comments, and I think staff did a great job of addressing them. And there were genuine concerns and genuine replies. But also, I think the small number of people here tonight reflects the fact that the bulk of the community recognizes that this was underway, and they felt very positive about it. And so I want to say personally, as a longtime resident of the city, I'm very happy to see it go forward, and I appreciate your efforts very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mayor Wan, members of the council, I'm Steve Garrett with the Castle Companies. I'd like to thank staff for the presentation this evening and for all the efforts that have taken place to date, both on the agreement that's before you here this evening and on the design review and on the neighborhood meeting, which we've been arranging. I just want to briefly say that we're looking forward to this opportunity to build these replacement homes in the Crestmoor neighborhood, and we have an upcoming meeting with the neighbors. We realize it's going to be unique in that these are replacement homes in different lots in different parts of the neighborhood, and it's going to require a lot of coordination, and we're going to make every effort to work with the neighborhood constructively to do that. And we're also going to be answering a lot of questions for them that they have regarding a schedule. We do believe we can get the homes built on the schedule that we have in the agreement. We don't intend to work weekends. We seldom, as a company, work weekends. There may be occasions where we might need to, but those arrangements will be made in advance, and we will also do that with the city to make sure we're complying with local ordinances as to hours and working hours and those sorts of things if and when that need arises. But we do look forward to the opportunity, and I'd like to thank Mr. Zaffarano for the presentation and the one question about the development agreement and reconveying the agreement as the replacement homes are completed. One of the reasons for it, the main reasons we asked, is that when a consumer comes to purchase the new home and a mortgage lender, which most of the homes will have conventional consumer mortgages on them, that lender typically will not allow an exception that's as complex as this agreement, just sort of sitting on title for an indefinite period of time. So in order for us to sell and close the home with the new home buyer, we need to have that reconveyed and removed, which is another reason for documenting it the way that we've asked that it be documented. I'm available to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for the developer? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to address the council? If we close the public hearing, you're going to be precluded from talking to us about this item again.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion and second to close the public hearing on the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Discussion or action by the council?
One last question. What is considered, what is the legal term or this official term of certificate of occupancy? So what is actually, that's the completed house?
Right. The intent of the certificate of occupancy is that the utilities have been provided, the construction is completed, and the home can be occupied by a household. It's ready for occupancy, legal occupancy.
Could there still be an open permit on it? Building permit?
Typically
Could
not.
it look unfinished?
No. Typically, it's a finished home. Not to say that there couldn't be what we refer to as a temporary certificate of occupancy, but with a certificate of occupancy, the home is complete and ready for occupancy, period.
Okay. Anything else? Action by the council?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to see what
This would be a motion to introduce the ordinance.
Waive the first reading.
Excuse me, waive first reading and then, yes.
We'll help you out.
I'll make a motion to waive the first reading of the ordinance.
Second.
Motion and second to waive the first reading of the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And I will introduce the ordinance for adoption.
Councilmember Ibera.
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell. Aye. Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Salazar.
Aye.
Mayor Ruane.
Aye.